Por ahora, ¿me escuchan? ¿O me pidió que hablara? ¿Se escucha bien? ¿Se escucha? ¿Qué tal? Saludos desde acá al sur de Chile.
Te escuchamos, pero tú no nos escuchas, parece.
Ahora te escucho. Ahora escucho allá.
Ya.
Bien.
¿Y ahora me escuchas ahora?
Ahora te escucho bien. ¿Tú a mí?
Maravilloso. ¿Quieres compartir tu presentación para probar que funciona?
Eso me gustaría.
Gracias.
Chévere acá.
Necesito que se entienda. ¿Cuánto te va a dar acceso ahora?
Ahí lo tengo, sí.
No, ya está, ya está. Perfecto. Súper.
Ahí se proyecta, se cambia la.
Perfecto.
Ya. Voy a dejar de comprar.
Yeah, there's also that. So let's start.
Okay. Just close the window.
Peter weg. Firefox. Ist es denn da Firefox? Schickst du da?
I just close the window.
Fluchst mit da.
Bueno,
Ach, yeah.
excellent.
So that,
¿Está ahí?
it's Firefox is a different browser. Oh, good.
Buenas tardes. I begin in Spanish and then in English. Buenas tardes a todas y todos. Gracias por venir el día de hoy. Mi nombre es Jorge Atria. Estoy a cargo de este proyecto FONDECYT sobre la elite y la clase alta chilena, los grupos superiores. Y en este proyecto también participan como co-investigadores Rachel Teodor, Macarena Orchard, que es profesora de Sociología en la Universidad Diego Portales, y el profesor Javier Hernández, que ya vieron y verán online por esa vía. Este workshop forma parte de una serie de workshops que estamos organizando semestralmente. Este es el tercero que hacemos. Cada uno de ellos nos sirve para que las y los estudiantes que están haciendo sus tesis en el marco del proyecto puedan presentar y discutir sus avances, sus distintos capítulos, etapas de tesis con otras personas, como también conocer los trabajos de otros y buscar oportunidades de cooperación, facilitando así el trabajo colaborativo y mejorando las investigaciones de todo el equipo. Muchas gracias. En este proyecto tenemos tres focos principales, solo para que tengan una idea general del proyecto de investigación. Primero, las percepciones de las élites sobre concentración económica y acumulación de oportunidades en un contexto de politización de las desigualdades, especialmente en Chile, pero también en América Latina. Segundo, las distinciones que se trazan día a día entre los grupos superiores y el resto de la sociedad chilena en distintas esferas de la sociedad. Y tercero, las interacciones entre los grupos superiores y otros grupos que trabajan a su servicio, ya sea como trabajo doméstico dentro del hogar o como trabajo externo, fundamentalmente asesoría tributaria y financiera. Y actualmente estamos desarrollando investigación empírica a través de focus groups, entrevistas y juegos de clasificación, con el fin de producir nuevos conocimientos en las áreas antes mencionadas y considerando también trabajo de campo con miembros de la elite y con personas de clase media y clase baja. En esta ocasión es un honor contar con dos invitados internacionales, Elizabeth y Matt, y queremos agradecerles por participar de este workshop. Elizabeth Tim Fussell tiene un doctorado de la Universidad de Manchester y anteriormente trabajó en el área de cooperación para el desarrollo del Ministerio de Exteriores austríaco. Es profesora asociada en Sociología y Política en la Universidad de Aston, en Birmingham. Allí también enseña Sociología de los Medios y es autora del libro Rich Russians, From Oligarchs to Bourgeoisie, el cual ganó el Women's Forum Book Prize de la Asociación Británica de Estudios Eslavos y de Europa del Este en el año 2019 y que tiene una traducción en ruso. La investigación de Elizabeth analiza la relación entre riqueza y poder en Rusia y el Reino Unido. También ha realizado investigación sobre medios y periodismo en Europa del Este, algunos de cuyos resultados han sido publicados en revistas tales como Journalism o European Journal of Communication. También aprovechamos de dar la bienvenida a Matt. Matt es estudiante de doctorado en London School of Economics, Inequalities Institute, probablemente. Sociología, London School of Economics. Y está realizando su tesis actualmente, que se relaciona con servicio doméstico remunerado y sus empleadores, quienes son personas de altos ingresos en Londres y en las áreas del sudeste de Inglaterra. ¿Vale? Está realizando entrevistas a empleadores, empleados y figuras intermediarias, y con ellas explora cómo el espacio doméstico es negociado como hogar y como lugar de trabajo. Entonces vamos a dar inicio a esta sesión. Y ahora voy in English. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Jorge Adria. I'm the lead researcher of FONDECYT project on the Chilean elite and upper class. And together with Rachel Tudor and Macarena Orchard and Javier Hernandez, we are organizing this series of workshops. We run these workshops each semester, and each of them allows students working on the project to present and discuss their progress with others, to learn about the work of others, and to seek opportunities for collaboration, thus facilitating collaborative work and improving the research of the whole team. Gracias. In this project, we focus on three issues. First, elite perceptions of economic concentration and opportunity hoarding in the context of the politicization of inequalities. Second, everyday distinctions between the top groups and the rest of Chilean society in different social spheres. And thirdly, we focus on interactions between upper groups and other groups that work in their service, either internally or externally, mainly financial and tax advisors. We are currently developing empirical research using focus groups, interviews, and classification games to generate new knowledge in the above-mentioned areas. Moreover, we are considering fieldwork with both elites and lower and middle-class groups. On this occasion, we are honored to have two international guests, Elizabeth and Matt, and would like to thank them for participating in this workshop. Very briefly, Elizabeth, senior lecturer, sociology and policy at Aston University, where she teaches media sociology. And she's author of Rich Russians, I already mentioned, awarded in 2019 Women's Forum Book Prize for the British Association of Slavonic and East European Studies, with several reviews and a Russian translation. And Elizabeth's current research looks into the relation between wealth and power, both in Russia and the United Kingdom. She has also conducted research on media and journalism in Eastern Europe, with a focus on self-censorship. She has several publications, for instance, in journals such as Journalism and the European Journal of Communication. And Matt is a doctoral student at the London School of Economics. His thesis looks at the relationships between paid housekeepers and their wealthy employers in London and Southeast England. Through interviews with employers, employees, and intermediary figures, he explores how domestic space is negotiated as both a home and a workplace. So we have a first session in English with 4 presentations. First Elizabeth, then Matt, then Javier, and finally Angelica. Then a small coffee break, and then we have a second session in Spanish with 4 presentations, undergraduate thesis and a graduate thesis. So we hope we have a very interesting workshop. Thank you very much. And first we will begin.
No sé por qué, pero la pantalla.
And suddenly we have a problem.
Oh, I can see the screen here. That's good.
You can
I
see-
get started. I get started.
First.
Oh, here we go.
Good.
Thank you very much. Was the ChatGPT the job or your own? It's very the translation. You also I understood my surname. Doesn't have my lots, and when I show myself, it's more complicated than what is on the screen. And I've already been introduced, so I don't need to. I thought I'd have to give a small overview. What I'm doing now, and that's relevant for what I'm going to talk about, is I started following for the last 2.5 years everything that's going on around the war. Ever since before, actually a few days before the invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022. And so it's basically research into elites that is pretty ad hoc. We can understand it as a new fancy term. Research in the circumstances of global shocks. Oh yeah, that can be made bigger somehow. I don't know whether that right.
Sorry.
Ah.
Wait.
Another thing I'm doing right now is, that's why it's just on my screen, on my radar, with colleagues where I'm doing the media journalism research with, we've done a project into troll factories. You will have heard, it was now, we've got August, he might have still just about been alive a year ago, Prigozhin, the chap who set up the troll factories in Russia, and also Wagner, the private mercenary army in Africa in the first place, then Syria, then unofficially in Crimea and eastern Ukraine, who then organized a mutiny against the putsch. They tried to come to Moscow and take over the Kremlin. Didn't manage, and then Putin didn't like it, took his revenge, and had him fly off the sky in was it a helicopter or plane? Anyway, he died. And we've got this data on it. And there's one guy in the team, and he is the super expert on it. And there again, and that's why I was asking Catherine the other day about ideas for case study research. There all comes together. And actually, it was Jorge, the discussions with Seamus Khan in London also that gave me further I've thought about it for a long time, but for the push of there needs to be something done, otherwise we're missing out on knowledge production. That is basically, we have a national experiment in front of a treasure gold mine in front of us, but there are so many things that are holding us back and we can't research it. So if we go back to 3 examples from data that's come my way, I didn't have to do much for it. There's been a lot. So my moment of fame and glory, I pushed off Boris Johnson, our Trump, the front page of the Spiegel, by being very angry when a journalist called me and I was angry, and it kind of, I thought was more interesting. And then I had, so it was by pure chance, and something that triggered it, journalists calling media requests. And it was on the 23rd of February, it was 30 people calling, and then so it went. And I put them in a database. And so there are now a few hundreds, and it's information about, it was quite interesting what the journalists ask. Starting also, all of a sudden they all talked about the oligarchs, and there was an issue because so many, it was everybody wanted oligarchs to be sanctioned, but the governments, especially in London, where everybody likes the local oligarchs, what they did was they named 3 oligarchs who have nothing to do with London. You need to find them for a start, it's not that easy, but they managed. And then played around with the terminology, and journalists then calling and feeling very sorry. So is it really fair to sanction this oligarch? Is he really responsible for what's going on? Well, he's made his billions. It's probably good in with the Kremlin. Otherwise, you don't make these billions. And so on. And it was quite interesting number of milestones. So the database, it's interesting if you take a step back. For bigger analysis, you would compare the US, the UK, and the EU with the sanction policies very differently. But because I happen to follow it, so kind of basically every minute, I've got data that show that one doesn't usually have and ask the questions. How did journalists ask their questions? What were they wanted to find the good oligarch, the one who's always been Kremlin critical, and well, the Kremlin critical oligarch only exists when they can't make any money in Russia anymore. Before that, they are not Kremlin critical. and so on, and how they changed over time. So I've got actually a pretty good big database that I would happily share for research, video research, if someone was interested. Won't ever happen, which is a bit a problem that annoys me. Then also the whole information I collected with, they were especially interesting for me, the investigative journalists. And we noticed halfway into the war that the number one on the Forbes list of the year, you will never heard the name, Vladimir Lysin, was missing on every sanction list. He is still missing to this day. He owns a steel empire, and the steel empire happily produces massively huge demand for the military industrial sector for the Russian army. He also exports, because he's not sanctioned, his steel all over Europe. And then we were wondering, so, why is this guy missing from A, all the sanction lists, B, not written about in the media? And then we realized, oh, maybe we could write about it as investigative journalists. So I collected investigative journalists and we digged into it. And the story, it's off topic, but it's quite a creepy story by his missing. Anyway, so it went. So this whole information and also enablers, they're my favorites. There's one lawyer, for example, he spends half his time in Dubai, where they're now all feeling very sorry for themselves. They're billionaires. They're getting more and more billions, but have to go to the public beach because their yacht is confiscated. It doesn't help them much. And so it's kind of it's a concentration of information coming my way that I try to somehow do justice to by documenting, recording it, because I'm very forgetful. I need to write it down, but at the same time, there's a problem. I will find my tricks, but I need to apply tricks to do something with it. Then, well, that's related, what I was just saying, trying to catch up with all the information that comes my way. Why can't I do anything with it? Because I haven't gone through ethics clearing at my university. It's not as bad here, I hope, as it is in UK academia. My university is particularly astonishing in how it can drag out the process. But the last thing I would have possibly done, getting 30 phone calls in on the 23rd of February, and the next day an invasion starting, the first war in Europe, I was going through an ethics. It was not on my my schedule, my to-do list. So all the data I have, if I follow all the rules, get it. And whatever, there's just no chance. In a situation, and it doesn't only apply to elites, when elites need otherwise more creativity, but anything that happens in this world, where there's a certain suddenness, a certain shock element in it, there's no chance to ever. So basically, research boards are designed to, in the first place, to sabotage knowledge production. I did the noise. Also, that goes back to the conference. That was, I found a curious thing, that there was an interesting discussion. Sarah Kunshi researches golden passport citizenship and now has superb access to elite, or this is communication to kind of some WhatsApp chats. And she was wondering how to, because you can't, the situation where you can't anonymize data, obviously, it's not possible what to do with it. But there was another interesting discussion, and that was about how to handle the information. And there I find it a bit of an interesting thing. It's now changed quite a bit in contrast to a few years ago, where there was arrogance in academia, social science research methods make data by default superior and higher quality to data collected by think tanks or other research bodies or journalism. And I would very much question that in general terms, but in particular so when it comes to all the fantastic stuff that forensic journalism, for example, does, or citizen intelligence, open source journalism, and so on. We'd be pretty lost if we wanted to get any information. Gaza, Israel, for example, no journalists were allowed in anymore. we were completely reliant on people sending to this whole, like you can call it movement, it's the wrong term for it, but this whole tradition we have now to send into the place, Bellingcat and other investigative outlets, information. They verify it, do the fact-checking and everything, collect information and find out whether that is a fake, what Twitter or X, Musk, whether that is fake news or not in war reporting. We need these sources in war reporting, and I think there is a lot of what actually social scientists could learn from, we all could learn from and use and collaborate with, rather than the other way round. That is another aspect. How many minutes do I have left?
4.
Okay. University ethics boards are usually interested in defending and safeguarding their own interests, not to be sued, not to have any problem if they allow you out to the area where there are any insurance problems and so on. There is a reason that they should have any particular idea or expertise, but they also don't care about you. If you want to actually be on the safe side, you need a library. And that's also the thing. So many elite researchers by time or whatever it is, can be whatever. Over time, you gather your own expertise on how to proceed, and rather than ethics boards being open to learning from you and collaborate and design a reasonable plan, it's this disciplining, this putting you down, which is for the researcher in the most cases not of any help in the end at all. And what they do is basically make sure that they're not reliable in the end. So I think we need a big overhaul. I will skip my ideas, otherwise I could go on forever about what I think to do, which is everything different about comparative research, completely rethink it and get out of what is actually colonial thinking in how we group countries. For example, the emerging economies, you have Russia, put it together with China and maybe Poland, and then the developed ones. I, for example, say, no, why not use wealth inequality as a grouping parameter? All the countries where wealth inequality is the biggest, there the chances are very good. Oligarchies are the most developed. Let's compare those to those who are more equal. Completely different logic. Why not go for it? But it's so kind of also stuck behind here. And a lot more, I think, creativity and flexibility in data collection, then also a certain rethinking for, well, now I have faced a problem. I'm writing an article using my data. And I can see myself going down, so that's Chatham House rules, or my house, going down the Coward Road and relabel the data I have into an expert interview, because expert interviews is what a reviewer will have heard before and might then tick the box that it passes. Then, of course, the problem, I don't have the ethics clearing. So it will be an interesting exercise, but what I have to go through is basically this cheeky renaming in order for social science traditions to be able to cope with it. Last word, what I also think ethics are superbly important. And so one of the research I'm doing is with journalists who've been thrown out, exiled, living exiles outside Russia. And we did a workshop with them. They're basically super young. They still have people on the ground all over Russia, and livelihood after livelihood, whole families depending on them. They have to think through journalistic principles, ethical principles on a basis that if they make mistake, their staff might end up in prison. One of them, a former colleague, got a prison sentence of 7 years. So it's pretty kind of a different level of responsibility. But on top of it, there were so kind of all these kind of steps, also in terms of being ethical, because that's how you treat your sources, that you don't endanger your sources, that you also don't endanger or deceive sources where you think, well, this FSB and Secret Service agent, what should I care? That you nevertheless care, because if you don't have ethics now, it's basically jeopardizing the own role you can play maybe one day in media if you follow an ethically dodgy path from the onset. So I think we could also in that terms copy some kind of ideas from that world. Thank you.
So presentations.
Yeah, it's the Santiago presentation. Do you want? Yeah.
This one?
Yep. See.
Just a second. This is sure. Yeah.
Yes. Oh,
No.
I guess. Great. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Thanks to Jorge and Perez for inviting me. So leads can be measured in many different ways. It can be measured by income, wealth, power, social networks, or cultural capital. But I'm going to start with an example of where it was measured in a very different way. So if you don't recognize this, this is one of Charles Booth's poverty maps from the late 19th century. Basically, him and his team went all around London and classified every single street according to different classes. With the low income neighborhoods, they did it by income. But with the wealthy, they couldn't really do that. They had to find a different way of classifying them. The way they did it was by the number of servants they have in their house. So the red streets you can tell to do middle class families, they have one or two servants. The kind of gold color, that's the wealthy families, they have three or more servants. So this just gives you an idea of how you can consider elites in a different way. And this is a house that has been maintained from that period. This gives you an idea of how the spaces within these houses were different. It says the rooms reserved for servants are apt to be cheerless and dull, even when the employer's rooms can be very grand indeed. Now, television shows like Downton Abbey or Upstairs Downstairs that you might have seen have immortalized this period in history and those relationships between the wealthy and their domestic workers. And often journalists and members of the public will use these titles to refer to the kind of continuing class hierarchy within the UK between the wealthy and those who work for them. Or, in terms of the title of my paper, those who learn how to serve and those who learn how to be served. So, as a period of high wealth inequality, you might recognize this chart from Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century. In this kind of period, the late 19th century, both sociology of elites, sorry, this is hard to, there we go, that's better. So both the sociology of elites and the sociology of domestic work are very popular, from Harriet Martineau, Thorstein Veblen, and Du Bois. But this changed by the mid-20th century when, at least in the global north, there was relatively lower wealth inequality. As an example, Charles Wright Mills' famous book Power Elites, he criticizes Veblen for focusing too much on servants and consumption when really should be talking about political power. And on the first page of Distinction by Bourdieu, he has a quote from a historian saying, "How will we survive without servants?" So they're very much saying servants, having servants in homes, that's in the past. We're in kind of modern 20th century now. Skip forward to the also at the same time, sorry, there was still lots of research on domestic work, the unpaid domestic work. So, for example, Anne Oakley compared working and middle class housewives, and Sylvia Federici and others, Wages for Housework campaign, saying, this isn't work that's done for love. It's, as she says, it's unwaged work. Skip forward to the late 20th century, early 21st century, neoliberal globalization, and wealth inequality is on the way back up. And unsurprisingly, all the people here today, but there is now a huge resurgence in elite research, but also a resurgence in research on paid domestic work. But although more women have entered the workforce in this time, researchers like Rochelle Perennies and Bridget Anderson say that isn't because men are picking up the slack. It's because they're delegating this work to women from the global south and racialized groups to basically do that work instead. So my research is basically seeing that at the moment, there's lots of research on elites and their lifestyles and all this kind of stuff, but not so much in this literature about those who support those lifestyles. At the same time, there's a lot of research on domestic work around the world, but the focus there is on the workers, and there's much less discussion about their relationship with their wealthy employers. So I'm trying to fill that gap by looking at elites and non-elites relationally. It's worth saying I'm not the only person. There's some exceptions here and probably some others in this room, but it's definitely a smaller space. The two kind of main research questions I'm looking at are, with the increase of wealth inequality in the UK, are we returning to this Downton Abbey world? Is that coming back? Where some learn how to serve and others learn how to be served. And what is the relationship between employers and employees in these households? Is it exploitation, or is there some kind of mutual advantage there? So this is based on two different bits of research I've done. One is my fieldwork for my master's, which I turned into a peer-reviewed article, and that's involving planning document analysis, interviews, and analysis with charity I worked with, and then my PhD, which I'm going into my fourth year, nearly done. And I've done a survey with migrant domestic workers. I've done interviews with wealth elites, domestic workers, and the figures who kind of broker those relationships. And I've also done some analysis of job adverts and estate agent listings. So to start off with the master's research, this is a zoom in of the map you saw at the beginning. I focused on the most expensive street in London, which is called Eaton Square. That is it today, and that is it in the late 19th century. So both in the past and today, it has been the wealthiest area. But again, it hasn't actually always been the case. So early on, there were large single family houses with rooms for domestic servants. This is an old floor plan, quite hard to see, but that says maid's bedroom, maid's bathroom, there's butler's rooms, all of this kind of thing. But around this time, in the mid-20th century, even in the richest streets, times were tough, relatively. They were having to split up these big houses into individual flats because nobody could afford to buy the whole houses. But now, one of the planning professionals I talked to said they're being put back together. And so between looking at the planning data between 2003 and 2019, at least 39 flats and maisonettes were rejoined together, including this huge thing by German Khan, Ukrainian billionaire. It's 6 floors, 9 bedrooms, including staff in the basement. Is he Russian or Ukrainian?
He's now saying he's Ukrainian. They all now say
Russian/Ukrainian, depending on before or after the war. Yeah, but that gives an idea of it was together, it was split up, and now it's together again. But I mean, looking at this, you might think, oh, we're going back to Downton Abbey, right? With staff in the basement, family in the rest of the house. But what I found through the charity that I worked with is actually a very different dynamic. So Kalian, that means freedom in Tagalog, one of the main languages of the Philippines. They work with overseas domestic workers who are escaping from abuse. And they kindly gave me access to their data, and they found that 60% of their clients didn't have their own room. 38% didn't even have a bed of their own. So often they would be living in the child's bedroom on the floor next to where the child is. So in a way, we've gone from segregation of employers and employees to the complete other extreme, where there's just no privacy at all. One of the limitations of my master's research was that I couldn't actually make a concrete link between that data I've just showed you and where these places are. So at the moment, or at this point, we are very much dependent on anecdotal data from journalists, very good reports, but it's very much not a systematic mapping of where people are. To address that, I applied for funding from my university to do a survey with the Workers' Charity, and they will pay for their time. And what we ended up doing was asking them how they were treated, which, as you can see, very poorly, not given day off work, not given rest periods. Yeah, it's pretty awful. That, although we already knew, what we didn't have, and what was important, we asked them where their employers were. So, this shows the concentration of where they are, and this is a map showing the house prices. So this is Kensington and Chelsea. I believe your equivalent would probably be Viticula, that kind of area, right? So you can see there's this overlap here. So these workers we talked to here are just one part of the domestic staff, though, and actually, some people who work in these houses are extremely well paid. But it's very much stratified by gender, nationality, and race. So at the top of the hierarchy, as much as 6 figures, you have your house managers, head butlers, private personal assistants. They mostly look like me. They're white British men. And there's some women and Western Europeans as well. And I don't know if you recognise this chap. This is Jeeves from Jeeves and Wooster, who's the kind of archetypal British butler. Next is nannies. Mary Poppins. This is very much all in the imaginary of the lead. These are the types of people they want. So again, mostly white British women. But there is actually an increasing preference for what are called nannies, male nannies, and for parents who want a male role model for their children. In the next group is quite a heterogeneous group: housekeepers, concierges, chauffeurs, security guards. They're kind of around the median income. Big gender, racial mix, minoritized British, former British Empire, and Eastern Europeans who have got resident status after Brexit. And then the lowest paid, the group that I've already talked about, are paid for next to nothing, almost modern slavery, up to minimum wage, mostly racialized women from the global south on precarious visas or even undocumented. So it would be easy to look at this and think, okay, so those at the top, they have mutual advantage. They're getting paid and they're helping their employers out. It's a mutual advantage. And then those at the bottom are being exploited. And I mean, there is evidence to show both of those arguments. And Will Davies here even suggests that we need to stop looking at all relationships between elites and non-elites as exploitative. There is actually opportunities for mutually advantageous service. And one of the employers I spoke to, this is Anne, she lives in the castle, she's an aristocrat, and she describes herself as a working mum, and she says, I'm like any other CEO, and in order to run my company well, I need people who are really good at what they do to help me run my business. So it's very much seen in a mutually advantageous relationship. And from the other point of view, so this is from the employee's point of view, this is Henri, and he worked as a head chauffeur, a head concierge in a luxury apartment block. And he's saying how working for the rich is a really good place to be when there's successive global crises. So he's saying that financial crisis, Brexit, and COVID, I was fine because the rich always had money. I was always getting paid while my friends and family were going through tough times. So maybe mutually advantageous. Not everyone agrees, though. There's a great book by French researcher Alice Delpierre. She describes this dynamic called golden exploitation, where you might be well paid, but the money is given by employers to employees to almost justify the exploitation, to make it seem desirable. And again, I did see evidence of that as well. This is Ray, he's a billionaire businessman. You know, none of these employers were explicit about being horrible to their staff, but you get a sense from reading between the lines. He says, we're like family, but interestingly, he says, if they don't give me their 100%, you can't be in my family. You know, that's why I do have a short fuse. So he's saying, I want everything from you or you're out. And similarly, from the employee perspective, and this is Liam, he used to be a butler and now he's a recruiter. He's saying that, you know, you've got to fly all around the world. You can't have a plant that needs to be watered, you can't have a boyfriend, girlfriend. You've got to give up your life. And this is how some of the staff described it: is you do it for a few years, it's hell, but you get enough money to buy a house. So this is what meant by golden exploitation. But not all this exploitation is golden. As you know, I've described already, some of it is just exploitative on its own. This is Rosemary, she's from the Philippines, and she ran away from her employers. She described being treated like an animal, as I described, you know, sleeping on the floor. But at the same time, only focusing on this reduces Rosemary and people like her to, you know, people who have no agency, just victims. And that's not the case. She is also extremely proud of how hard she works and how she's putting her daughter through university, taking political science, so like with the degrees people are doing here. So she's extremely proud of that. So it's, you know, arguably she has achieved social mobility for her daughter, but at a high price. And some theory by what Sam Friedman has described as the price of the ticket, that you might achieve social mobility, but that may be at the cost of, you know, unhappiness in other areas of your life. So to conclude, I'm going to return to some of the questions I posed at the start of the presentation. Are we returning to the world of Downton Abbey? In some ways, yes. You know, the kind of archetypal British figures of the butler and the nanny still very popular, but it is much more international, both in terms of employers and employees, compared to in the past. And with high, one critical issue facing elite studies is that it's quite a good article looking at some of the issues of elite studies by Bruno Kazan and colleagues, is that there is a tendency to think about poverty as structure and elites as culture and agency. And they're saying, well, no, we need to think about both from both perspectives. And I think that considering elites not in isolation, but in their relationship to other classes, might be one way to show how both sets of populations are kind of constricted by structure and enabled by agency, even though they have different access to resources. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Can you hear me well? I'm gonna share my PPT, please.
Javier?
Okay, so can you hear me well now? Yes, isn't? Okay, so I'm Javier Hernandez. I'm gonna present an ongoing work that we're conducting with Jorge over there as it's kind of a side project of the FONDECYT project, led by Jorge. What we're trying to do here is like researching intermediaries as a crucial economic actor, and in this case we're referring to accountants, investment managers in the broader sense, and lawyers, which are central in shaping contemporary economic field, and specifically wealth distribution, and specifically wealth accumulation and protection. In this sense, what we propose. Sorry.
¿Puedes empezar de nuevo?
Okay, no problem. The presentation is the introduction is not necessary, but we are researching intermediaries such as accountants, investment managers, and lawyers as central actors or players in the economic field. In this sense, we think this is an overlooked agent in this field, and we aim to know more about them, specifically here in Chile, but in two senses. One is that they actually perform relevant tasks in the economic field, but also we believe that they're crucial tools for us as researchers to understand the global picture of the economic field and the wealth distribution. For that purpose, I asked Google Gemini to tell me a little bit a simple explanation about how GPS works. You all know GPS when you use Waze or Google Maps. And GPS uses satellites to pinpoint your location by measuring distance. It uses trigonometry, the math of triangles, to calculate your exact position based on distances from multiple satellites. Think of it as solving a puzzle with triangles. And that's actually what I think we can do with intermediaries, in the sense that they have a specific perspective to have a broader map, actually, of the economic field and the way how resources are distributed, and also the perspective to locate ourselves within this map. So that's kind of an introduction. What we have been doing, this is ongoing work. We plan to do some more interviews, but so far we have conducted 22 semi-structured interviews to understand these professionals in various sectors: accountants, lawyers, wealth managers in different financial services companies. And we explore topics like skill acquisition, client relationships, industry perspectives, and work environment. So pretty much about their whole work and how they relate with clients specifically and their demands. Participants were recruited through a chain referral sampling, and most of the interviews were conducted in person, face-to-face basis. We are related here with three main literatures. One of these literatures are the literatures about high-skill sector service, knowledge-intensive services, and also elite services. So these kind of professionals are actually part of these categories, and they are actually, most of them, part of the elite, if we define that in terms of their incomes. The other literature is related to this concept of the wealth defense industry. So how specific occupations, in this case, most of the ones studied, lawyers, accountants, corporate lawyers, accountants, and also wealth managers, protect wealth from redistribution and different challenges. But we also want to do our research in the sense of the broader sociological understanding of intermediation. So we find like 4 definitions of the intermediary, and each of those provide us a standpoint to look our phenomenon. The similar intermediary is crucial in social network analysis, and in this sense, this intermediary is a broker. So it fills a gap, a structural hole within a broad network, and connect that, and is relevant in this sense, having themselves interested in this relation. The Schumpeterian intermediary works someone who is able to connect problems and solutions that are able to find new ways of doing things, and so they intermediate between opportunities, problems, products, all this sort of stuff. In the case of the Latourian intermediary from the actor network theory, this intermediary not only connects people, but also they are able to translate between different domains of human experience and even non-human experience. And we will develop that later on. And the last one is the Bourdieusian intermediary, which we will not taken too much into account here, but it's part of his reflection about cultural intermediaries as taste makers within a particular society. So we have like 3 types of intermediary work here. One is related to legal, mostly lawyers, of course, legal kind of intermediaries. The second one is related to management, and in this case, we have lots of information about accountants. And in the third case, we have finance, and specifically mostly wealth managers in different areas. So the lawyers provide legal advice, crisis management. They can litigate, they can defend their clients, they can create legal formulas to innovate, and they can also represent their clients in terms of institutional work, so lobbying and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, we find that management, the accountants, they're very relevant on planning incomes and outcomes for the clients, helping the constitution of their firms and enterprises. They're very important in terms of tax compliance and tax advice. And what they provide us is very relevant for our topic. And also, wealth managers, they're very important in terms of providing investment opportunities. They're able to translate property into trust, difficult to access for other entities. They provide access to corporate finance, merger and acquisition in terms of transforming firms into subsidiaries, and so on and so forth. So they work together. They are part of a global circuit. They're part of a division of labor, a complementary division of labor, and they provide different things. In the case of the lawyers, they mostly, but not only, provide institutional entrepreneurship. They're able to put the institutions at the service of their clients in some or help to do that. The management or the accountants, they have a lot of technical, very detailed knowledge about different things, and also they can provide some managerial innovation ideas. And while they are not always innovative, as the interviewee said, but most of them are able to apply norms in a different way. And in the case of wealth managers, they are able to make connections between businesses, and they are very important in terms of allowing capital to reproduce wealth. So in a broader sense, after looking at our interviews, we find that these intermediaries are pivotal in 4 dimensions of the economic field, in terms of discourses, like in terms of the legitimacy of their own work and their clients' outcomes. They're very pivotal also in terms of their own practices in order to what they do, and especially what they're asked to do. That's very important. Circuits, they tell us a lot about, because in sociology we deal with economic activities, but business people, they know much more about the circuits, and these particular people that are actually the ones who connect these circuits are crucial. So we know about exchange circuits, global formulas of wealth circulation and all this stuff, and also institutional work, how they deal with norms, and how they take advantage of the current norms. So in terms of our ideas of conclusions, we think that in the terms of the Simmelian intermediary, we all know that, but it's good to see it again, the importance of the relational nature of the economy, and how they play a particular role brokering between different actors, and also how their relational work is very important, how they deal not only with the economic field, but with the whole life of their clients and the trust of their clients. On the other hand, we have the Schumpeterian dimension, where entrepreneurship and innovation is crucial. They're asked to do things that could not be foreseen, try to find new gaps, trying to find in legislation, trying to find new norms that can be used, new incentives to get here. But also, for me at least, the most interesting dimension is the Arthurian dimension, because these intermediaries allow the crossing of the blurring or the connection between what we use as usual distinction to see the economy, the legal and illegal economy, for example. They kind of bridge that circuits, also the formal or informal, the public and private, the idea of large or small businesses, for example, in terms of subsidiaries, and also local and global. So these global circuits of intermediaries connects and blur the distinction between local and global. So for us, I think it's a crucial what the interviewees provide. It's a crucial point of view on how the economy works and how the map of the economy, how can we reconstruct this map of an economic field like the one in Chile, but in terms of a global, and the global one also. The limitations, of course, is still the difficulty of how to reach the difficult ones, and I think part of Elizabeth's presentation is crucial in terms of how can we find sources that help us to keep closing the gaps here, because interviewees always told us about what they're asked to do. So I have a client who told me that his friend is getting advice, a service by certain people, and they do this thing that I'm not willing to do because it's illegal. But how can we reach that other guy? That's the difficult thing, because I think we're still missing some of the information, because this kind of practitioners could be even more difficult to reach or to access than the extremely wealthy individuals. So that's my presentation, and thanks very much.
Thank you, Javier. And then, Angelica, please.
Sí. Un segundo.
¿Hablo?
Se me ve nuevo.
Sí. No, sí, yo caché que sí somos, se nota, se nota. Sí. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Angelica Bonilla. I'm a sociologist, but I'm currently doing my PhD in education. And this is some previous work that I did before my ethnographic fieldwork, which is taking place now. And what I wanted first was to map the field of elite schools in Santiago. Okay, so first, just a distinction about why it's important to study elite schools. So we can make a conceptual distinction between class, milieu, and elite. So if social class is primarily defined by economic capital and milieu by the social capital or networks, when we talk about elites, like following Pelfini and colleagues, we can think about them as groups that have a collective project of society and also the means appropriate to its realization. And this helps me think about the ideological fragmentation that we've been observing in Chilean elites. We have observed differences between the economic, the political, and the cultural elites. We have observed differences, for example, in the constitutional process, where elites' positions were very polarized. And also, for example, regarding people who attend different kind of universities. So the educational field, the point here is that it's key for social, but also cultural reproduction of elites. And particularly in Chile, which I think it's a main difference from the international literature that I've read, it's the importance of the school level, right? Because in some other places, the higher education institution is way more important to determine whether you will access a top position or not. In here, the school level has proved to be very determinant for elite trajectories, sometimes even more than higher education, even though they tend to have access to the best universities and careers also. We have an extended socialization period. So generally, elite schools, when you look at the international literature, it tends to be concentrated on high schools. In Chile, what happens is that parents will choose a school for their children generally in pre-K or before, and they will stay in that school for 14 years. So it's a very extended socialization period in an environment that is there's with high social closure, very segregated because they have huge economic barriers, but also there's like a fine match between the family and the school values and lifestyles. So previous studies have mapped elite schools or have made listings of elite schools in Chile, mainly using the positional method. So basically what you do is that you track to what school did people who are currently in top positions attended when they were young. And through that, we know now that elites, I'd say almost exclusively, but I think exclusively attend private, non-subsidized schools in Chile, which represent less than 10% of our educational system, with high membership and monthly fees. We also know that certain elite factions tend to choose certain educational projects. There's like a typology that has been used over and over again. So we have traditional Catholic schools. Catholicism is very important here in Latin America. In Chile, they were the first ones educating elites if you were not attending public education. Then you have neoconservative Catholic schools, which appeared in the 60s, 70s as a response to the liberalization of the Catholic Church views regarding family values or social justice. So they emerged as a reaction and are very conservative regarding like family values, but they are very quite liberal in the economic aspect. And then you have secular schools, and then you have different types within that group. So you have, for example, European settlements. In here, German immigration and British immigration was very important at some points. German primarily in the south of the country. Then you have some new international schools. Then you have bilingual schools. At some point, like just the mere fact of being a school that had a very good, well, not bilingual, not any bilingual, generally English language will make you an elite school. So the thing is that my problem with the positional method is that it introduces three biases. So the first one is if you look at the top positions, and because we have a very centralized country, you will end up with schools that are only located in Santiago. Then the second one is the gender bias, because women are so grossly underrepresented in the top positions. So in all the previous listings of elite schools that I've seen, women, like all girls schools, were absolutely absent from it, despite their high importance for Catholic elites in the country that generally chose all girls schools for the women. And then also you have a temporal bias because you're looking at schools that were important or that were preferred by the elites 30 years ago, 50 years ago. So my question basically was, are they still the same? Who's leading the field right now? And where are the women? So what I did is simple exercise. I chose criteria that are specific to the educational field in Chile. So I took the rankings for 100 best schools, the 100 best schools that achieve like the highest entrance examination scores in these 3 different years. Why? Because not only because academic achievement is what gives you status within the educational field, it's like the its main thing, but also because it gives you access to elite trajectories. The second one, I looked at their institutional networks. So they have pedagogical networks, religious networks, cultural networks. So I started mapping that mainly through their web pages. and some others are informal, and I access them while in the process of research. That allows me to differentiate these educational projects, and also being part of one of these networks give you a certain status, and it's a sign of mutual recognition as peers. Not any school can access some of the networks that I'm gonna talk about. And then the third one is having this strong sense of mission, trying to have a link to that idea that Pelfini was saying that, well, elites have some sort of collective project or mission. So I look at three things. For these schools, academic excellence is given for granted, but it's not enough. And like actually they kind of tend to look down to a school that is only focused on academic excellence. So there's a high importance of moral socialization, but also leadership calling. And what I looked at was their institutional mission and visions as like a very short statement instead of like reviewing their whole educational project. But looking for keywords like leadership, we want to be referenced, state-of-the-art education, and this duty towards social transformation, social awareness, contribution to the country or to the world. So the field that I found, there were 135 schools within these rankings. I eliminated all of the public and private subsidized schools, and as you can see, there were only 5. All of the other ones are private, non-subsidized schools. And I also eliminated schools that were lacking this sense of mission. I ended up with almost 100 schools between Antofagasta and Punta Arenas. This is not whole of Chile, but enough so you could see kind of some of the differences. So for example, all the yellow ones are the German schools, and you can see that it's a very extensive, important network within elite schools, but generally, because it's in the south of Chile, it's been under-researched, but it's very important in the south, and there's a researcher now that is working on that, if anyone is interested, Juan Pablo Benavides. And then if you look up, you will see, the importance of Catholic schools, which are marked by crosses. And then, for example, the purple ones are conservative schools, and the light blue are traditional Catholic schools. So just to show you, this is the high income sector of Santiago, just 6 communes. And only there you have 49 schools of my almost 100, so half of elite schools are evidently in the capital. And you can see some differences. So, okay, in Santiago, particularly, Catholic schools predominate. So you can see it's not like this predominance of German schools as in the rest of the country. And there's a difference. So if you see traditional schools tend originally, because they are so old, tended to be in the center of the city, and now they have moved towards the high-income sector. But they still are concentrated in more or like older neighborhoods like Las Condes, Vitacura, and Providencia. And there's some sort of stagnation because there are no new schools of this type opening. So they live on their prestige and tradition and status, but they are not opening new schools. Instead, conservative Catholic schools are thriving. They're opening not only in the high-income sector, but also in high-income suburbs that are like sprouting around Santiago, but also in regional capitals, for example, they're appearing there too. And also what I found out, it's like 2 new type of elite schools, or at least I haven't seen reference in previous research. So you have 2 Jewish schools that I think they tend to be overlooked because of like the primarily or predominantly Catholic culture that we have here, but there are like 2 Jewish schools that are consistently within like the first quartile of academic achievement. And then you also have new international stakeholders that this one and this one. There are like 2 in here, and I'm going to talk about them later, but generally these schools are opening in high-income suburbs instead of this. So they are going to compete in some other places of the city. So what I found, just to give you an idea. So the membership fee that you have to pay on the first year that you put your kid in the school is $3,000, but it can reach to $8,000. And the monthly fee is around 750 monthly fee, but it can be also a lot more. So, okay, so compared to the minimum wage, it's a lot, but I want you also to compare it to the lowest tier of the richest 10%. So the people who are in the 10% richest per capita household income, the lowest tier, they make around $1,197. So just the monthly fee, and I'm only referring to the 750 monthly fee, would represent 62% of that. And this is important because what I've seen, or what I've encountered beginning my ethnographic process, is that a lot of alumni of these schools cannot pay for them today without the help of their parents. So they are relying on their parents to be able to get into these schools. And that is something that Marco González Hernando had already found when he analyzed the British case. So I think that's interesting because it is happening here, and it's a consequence of the concentration of wealth. Second, so Santiago high-income sector schools are totally lead the upper half of the academic performance, and particularly conservative Catholics are completely dominant in the first quartile. And here comes that Catholic, all-girls, and gender-segregated classroom schools are a very important part of this group. They are leading academically. Meanwhile, traditional Catholic are shifting towards co-education, and they have different logics or justifications for this. So what I found is that most neoconservative schools are that segregating women will give them an academic advantage. And so they justify it like that. But traditional Catholics are arguing that the role of women has changed in society, that there is a need to adapt to the times, but there's also a market strategy because they need to attract more families, and you can catch all the children of one same family if you have education for boys and girls. Internationalization, there is like an explosion of international baccalaureate network. So more and more schools are offering the international baccalaureate. Well, bilingualism is almost given for granted. However, and this is interesting, most students remain in Chile for their higher education. What I've read in other third world countries, when you look at elite schools, it's that they tend to go and study in the United States of America, or they go to Europe. In this case, students tend to stay in Chile, and they will just go and do their postgraduate studies outside. And we have new international stakeholders that are trying actively to get in this club. They have to fight all the tradition that the other schools have. And how are they doing it? They are settling in high-income suburbs. They are slightly cheaper, not that much, but slightly cheaper than the other ones. They focus on academic achievement, in internationalization, and they are very active and trying to get into these networks. So getting into the British Association of Schools, the International Baccalaureate Association of Schools. So that makes them like see as equals as the other ones. But still their sense of mission is a work in progress. More subtle than the other ones. So basically what I wanted to show is that this method considers criteria that are specific to the Chilean educational field. It coincides but also expands previous research. And I didn't show you all of the other cities, but like I now have more information to a national level. There are new actors. Conservative Catholic are growing in influence, are growing in the type of schools that they are setting. And women are very high in the rankings and generally in segregated spaces. And that can have it kind of reinforces the argument that like these conservative schools are making. They cannot say that it's only because of that, but at least like the academic results are giving them that opportunity. And just to let you know what I'm doing now, my ongoing ethnographic fieldwork is focused on identifying models of citizenship in elite schools that have these different educational projects. So currently I'm working in two schools. One of them is secular. It serves top business and diplomatic elites. It doesn't have such good quartile of academic achievement, but because I am measuring that with my national examination exams, and a lot of the students of these schools go and are an exception to the rule, and they choose to go study outside of the country. And it's also very multicultural. And I'm going to a traditional school that serves managerial and political elites. with a higher ranking, and it's focused on social justice and communitarianism, and it recently went fully co-ed, so it's within that trend that we observed in traditional schools. That, I think, for now. Thank you, Brent.
Can you go to the slide with the I'm fascinated by the Catholic schools, the slide where early on where you have them listed.
Which one?
Lean
Oh, yeah. So, that one?
one back. There's another one, no? Yeah,
That one?
so what is SVD?
Oh, it's just a Catholic congregation, so it's in English, it's like the Society of.
Okay.
Sí, el verbo divino, but I don't remember there's a name for it. Those are different Catholic congregations that are very strong in the country and that have
they doing
several.
best, you're saying, right? That wants to do best. And they're spreading. No, they're kind of
No, the ones that are spreading are the neoconservative Catholics. So Opus Dei legionaries, which are originally from Mexico, and they're like they have a lot of. I didn't mention that, but like the trends that I'm observing here, for example, are also happening in cities like Guadalajara in Mexico, for example.
Okay.
So maybe it's like a Latin America thing. Schoenstatt is another conservative movement. It's more centered. It's German. It came from Germany, and it's focused on the Virgin Mary. That's like their main devotion.
So we're out of time, but anyway, we will have some time for questions and answers. So maybe you can sit there.
Or I can stand.
So questions, comments, suggestions.
In English, I think, so that they can know.
Okay. So I really like your investigation, and my question was more like, how did you accede to the field? I mean, you are doing a research that is pretty difficult. It's like elites, and that was what my question. How is it studying the elite? There is some difficulties. How did you accede to the field? Is it as accessible?
Okay, thank you for your question. It is very difficult. I was warned several times not to do it, but I wanted to do it anyway. And one of the reasons I did is because, and as observed in many elite research, being part of elite school grants you access. So people who have studied elite schools generally fall in kind of one or two categories. Whether they were alumni, I was an alumni and I studied in one of these schools, the Sacred Heart. And then, so the traditional Catholic. And the second one is generally people who are professors or teachers in those schools, and that's how they grant access to them. So it's been difficult. It's my original design hope to have 3 schools, one of each type. As you can see, I've only got access to 2 of them. I'm still trying to get access to the neoconservative ones, but those are the most difficult. So being part was something that helped me get access. And the second thing that helped me get access is because my research is on citizenship education. There is a new mandatory course. I don't know if you know, but now they have citizenship education in 11th and 12th grade, and it's mandatory. So I offer my research as a way for them to think about a course that they are still trying to design. They are not sure what to do with that or what subjects or topics discussed in that class. So I said that like my research could help them think about that. So that's just an opportunity of the moment.
How much time did it take you to make the research?
Well, I'm doing it now, but it took me like 3 months of negotiation with them to be granted access.
And what were the warnings you've got? And who warned you? the warnings you got not to do it.
Oh, okay. Well,
Your supervisor.
a lot of people told me that I would waste a lot of time trying to get access and that it was not guaranteed that I could get it. I planned my research with a design that if one of the type of schools is absent, it will still work. For example, I chose not to research schools that have been studied before in the Chilean context, which are just a few, but I chose not to go to those ones. So there's like ¿cómo se un aporte?
Contribution.
There's a contribution on expanding and looking at different type of elite schools that haven't been studied before. Thank you.
Sorry, I've got to pull up.
No question, I have questions.
Excellent. Why the neocons? Why they're so popular? Why they're becoming more popular now?
The schools?
Yeah.
Why are they becoming popular?
Why is almost there of all in the world becoming more popular? For example, how to explain the phenomenon?
But what do you mean becoming more popular?
I understood that in the bonds, yeah, growing, expanding. So,
Why are the conservative Catholics growing and like
yeah.
Well, they are achieving the best academic results, so that helps them. And then also you could say, I think this is a hypothesis, but like we are also observing conservative and right wing growing in the region.
Quite logic, just go to.
Yeah,
I was this for us.
and I'm not able to. I'm not doing ethnographic work there, but I'm following all of their institutional research. I mean, social media accounts, and like I just saw a very conservative kind of approach to civic education. Like they had a big ceremony and they were like raising the flag and chanting. They were celebrating like the day of the Chilean soldier. Do you even know what that date is? I don't know, but like they know. Interesting that they are like retaking that kind of traditions now.
But also answer about your question. I don't know what Angelica thinks, but I think that switch of them like becoming the best schools is like maybe an effect of the Catholic elite that was putting their children in the traditional Catholic school, changing their children, or maybe the ex students from traditional Catholic schools putting their children in the neoconservative schools. Mainly, I think because the ways the congregations are teaching children about how to relationate with the rest of society. Jesuit schools at Sagrado Corazon, I don't know what's the name in English, teaches their students a way of looking society very focused on serving the. ¿Cómo?
Like a role.
Yeah, the role in society. And Opus Dei and Legionario and Schoenstatt are more focused. Even the theology of Opus Dei says that you have to thank God and pray to God through your quotidian work. So that's the best way you can thank God and pray to God, doing your work and being a good father and a good worker.
Very Protestant kind of.
I think that's the main reason why the neoconservative schools are getting more popular.
It's interesting.
Do you have some?
Yeah, I have some questions. If nobody else in the students wants to ask. So I have one question for Elizabeth and another one for Matt. Both extremely interesting and extremely different presentations. I'm very curious about the Russian oligarchs because in your book, you describe how these oligarchs are mainly interested in supporting the Kremlin because they keep accumulating wealth. So now that the war broke loose, did that vision of supporting Putin change? Not.
Well, the vision of supporting Putin has always been very self-serving. So
Right.
nobody was happy about the war. It wasn't quite pleasant
Yeah.
for them, and none of them, even as good as they are in with the Kremlin, really wants to be fully at the mercy of Putin and stuck in Russia and not be able to jump in the private jets to get out and have the chef already waiting with the servants in London with a hot soup. But that doesn't make a big difference. They got sanctions were introduced so stupidly that they all found an individual solution and got richer by getting in with the Kremlin. So if you played it right, we got even richer. It's only in the last half a year that it's got a bit. Basically, before that, there was very enough funds and before economy and industry that the manufacturing could keep going and making it richer and richer. And now it's getting a bit tight and more less fun to do. But what can they do there? Then they have to support.
No, because I'm curious if they still like identify with being Russian before like versus Occidental life. I'm curious about the identity here, like struggle of these people because they do have their lives.
Because they're of course completely disgruntled and the best kind of being so arrogant, letting them drop. But at the same time, with German Khan. No, he's Ukrainian.
He's Ukrainian, yeah.
That's Russian, right? Like Blavatsky could always sue every journalist if you called him a Russian. It's like a lot in the UK that you can do that. But with others, they then became after the war. All of a sudden, not there were no oligarchs, you couldn't call them anyway, but no Russian businessmen anymore, but Ukrainian entrepreneur philanthropist of Jewish whatever descent. And then they were changing it. Other people changing back Wikipedia, and they counted in one case 170 times in 2 days that they're changing the names around the district. So of course they played the double game.
They played the double. Okay, that's a little thanks. Matt, I have so many questions because it's yeah, I was extremely interested in that. I think there's so much to do, like in a comparative stance between Chile and the UK. But I'm very curious because, for instance, in the Chilean case, the nannies and the domestic work has evolved in terms of law because we had like a nanny law a couple of years ago that really tried to like settle some really bad practices, which is what you were showing. So I'm curious about the British case. What's the case over there? Is there any like laws that regulate this and are followed? Like because there's a difference between law and practices, we can still see that here. I mean, it would be really interesting to ask these questions to these nannies. And the hierarchy I thought was fascinating. I think that's something we should explore. But what's it at? Is there any regulation, and is that over like bypassed?
So there are laws and regulations, but for you to be able to take advantage of them, you have to know about them and feel comfortable enough in your visa status to be able to assert your rights.
Yeah.
So if you're at the top, the butlers, and actually the like British nannies, they're very highly regulated. They know their rights. If they're fully treated, they will leave. But as you get further down toward people with the language barrier of not understanding the legal systems and even having a precarious visa status, then even if the law said they have to pay the minimum wage, they often aren't, and the employers will essentially say, what are you going to do? You'll get deported, right? And actually, in Chile, there are better rights for domestic workers than the UK. And like many countries, there's a independent labor organization protocol called Convention 121, which is about decent domestic work. It's ratified across most of Latin America, but the the UK hasn't ratified it. They claimed it would be too much bureaucracy for, you know, people wanting to hire a carer for their grand. Like, oh, you have to. Why should you have to worry about all of this kind of stuff? But most of the world has done it now. So yeah, it's actually, you know, this whole idea that the UK is this kind of height of human rights. Then
Yeah, that's
much better here. Much better here.
That's what I'm pointing at.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Because the view here is that, you know, Europe is like first world, so they have effective regulation. It's
Right.
not the case.
We're just good at hiding it. Yeah.
And the second question, very short. How much percentage of the UK population has domestic workers? Do you have an estimation?
Well, it depends what you mean by in
Like-
terms, yeah. In terms of if you have someone like once or twice a week,
Does
that's
someone
about 10-15%.
Oh, that's
But in terms of having somebody full time,
Yeah.
that's like 0.1.
Mhm.
Tiny,
Wow.
tiny. Yeah.
Okay. So you're talking about the extra rich here, like
Yeah. Because daycare, but it is state subsidized, so it's that's the one thing that most parents do versus much cheaper than hiring a nanny.
a nanny, of course.
Yeah.
That's where it changes here. Okay,
That's
thanks.
a question I want.
Maybe whether we can collect questions now, so.
Yes.
Thanks. Yeah, very fascinating research indeed. I was wondering what's kind of the, obviously you haven't concluded your PhD project and everything, but what's your hunch on what's the policy implication of your work? Like what's the piece of regulation that's needed to come in? Is it just giving those domestic workers, like elevating them to the privileges that the butler has in his work life? Or do we still maybe have a problem with this idea of global South women being shipped in to do the housework for rich white people?
Mhm.
Any other question?
Yeah, I've got one more. Yeah. Javier, I'd be interested in hear how you go about what your suggestions, ideas are if you could to research, for example, the gray zones and the legal practices.
You are mute, but maybe we can connect.
On the last part, on the last part.
Sorry?
The last part.
Aye.
Sorry, I couldn't understand the last part.
About how you go about researching or collecting data on illegal practices and gray zones.
Okay.
I have so a couple of questions. So thank you very much, you all. Elizabeth, do you plan conducting some interviews with journalists or newspapers managers? So I think this could lead to have somehow a comparison between the interpretations they make of news production with the patterns that you could find. And I think that could be a strategy, a good strategy also to defend the research against these ethical guidelines.
Interviews with journalists, so basically interviewing back.
Yeah.
So
Or managers, newspaper managers too.
so basically they approach me and
The full circuit or
then apply for ethics. Oh, clever, yeah.
And how do you see in general the potential cooperation in this kind of research with journalists dealing with financial tax and other associated issues? So I suspect that some interesting work published by journalists on dark opaque areas such as, for instance, the books on Panama Papers or the database on offshore leaks created by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists remain somehow separated from the lines of research that scholars develop in this area. So, fun question. And Matt, how has been your experience interviewing employees and employers from the same household? So we have a recent experience of an ad. No?
I did not in the same household.
Okay, because we have a recent experience of an undergraduate thesis dealing with service to employees working with the wealthy.
Yeah.
And our students saw that domestic workers tend to speak very well regarding their employers. So they see a close relationship and think that other workers have problems. The other workers have problems, not I don't have problems. So we see that as a difficulty when thinking about new options to research this relationship. Thank you.
Okay.
So you can answer, and we have few minutes, so I will say just a couple of minutes
Yeah,
for you.
I'll be quick. So, onto the policy implication. Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of a much broader thing about just there being a need for greater agreement on international standards, because as I said, a lot of countries have ratified this thing. I think the UK needs to do that, and I'm part of the charity that I mentioned, so I'm outside of academia. I'm actively lobbying with the charity to try and get the UK government to change that. We just had a change of government, so fingers crossed. Question on that. Yeah, I didn't interview within the same household because essentially it seems ethically dicey, and also if you do match them, you're going to hear nice things from both people.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like talking to just employers and just employees, I think they're probably a bit more honest, because they knew that there wouldn't be anyone to contradict them, and that they knew they wouldn't risk kind of disclosing each other. So, yeah.
Javier?
Okay, thanks very much for the question. As I said, I think the community of practitioners dealing with the like the illegal with the legal side of the service. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so the legal that's the most challenging thing, because I think it's the most. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yeah. So the thing is, the legal side of the community, can to name it, is the most difficult, the most challenging group, of course, because they're involved with this. But I think this connects also with the literature about wrongdoing. Most of them are not entirely aware they're like breaking the law, because they say like you're not you won't break the law, but you can bend it. You're not breaking the rules, but you can bend them. And I think that they're most of them are convinced that they're still playing in the limits of the law. And I think that's the tricky part, because if they're aware they're breaking the law, they are difficult to reach for obvious reason. But if they're not, they're still difficult to reach, because they may not be aware that what they're doing. At this point, we're only getting information about this sort of behavior by other practitioners that are always asked to do things that other people do for their clients. And those kind of practices are actually, some of them are even illegal, or at least ethically wrong. But that's the tricky part, and I think it's very important to try to find ways. And I think journalists are actually very important, because they're actually gathering information about illegal practices. Many of the recent scandals have been leaked by journalists, and both in the corporate field, also in the elite field. So I think that the partnership with journalists are promising. Are very promising in terms of reaching different sorts of data that allow us to reach this very difficult point or informant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
So yeah, very briefly, yeah, totally. I mean, I was conceptually sometimes Transparency International UK, for example, years ago.
Yeah.
They have conceptual ideas that are no, I mean, they're grandiose of how to research corruption, bribery, and stuff. And I've always wanted to work with them, but now only slowly there's more openness in social research.
yes.
Yeah. But what I also want, what I insist on is in some project ones what I'm planning now is to have them as part of the project and not just for impact or for exchange. I want because they're and that also relates to what Javier said. It's basically also on this investigative journalism, consortium, whistleblowers, and so on. I think it's a way of us working in gossip. It's not so bad, I think, as a tool when there's no other access. Getting the stories via others, but then it's about what every journalist should do with the fact checking. So when you collect the information and have not necessarily a concrete case, but a practice, how normalized it is, and then fact checking it in terms of is there this legal loophole? Could it be? Is it actually possible and get information from elsewhere? That's the way I think that could work if it was accepted.
Mhm.
And yeah, good idea. I need to think about kind of basically pro forma going back and tricking the system.
Yeah.
I like
Struggle against ethical guidance. Well, thank you very much for this fantastic session. We have a coffee break and we should be here back in around 10 or 15 minutes. Y tenemos una sección en español, así que por favor se den chance de invitado o invitada a seguir participando. Muchas gracias. El café es
Very nice meeting you this way, Mark and Elizabeth.